as a physician, I must give you some biases. I have no drug biases. I don't own stock in any pharmaceutical company, despite all the work we've done for pharmaceutical companies. And that has been a pleasure to be able to do that, by the way. We've been able to get some medicines to people that nothing was working for and find something new that did work for them. But I have two biases. One, of course, is I am a medical director at the behavioral geriatric unit at Baptist Princeton, and so Baptist Princeton is my favorite geriatric unit in town. The other bias is that I think everything has to have a spiritual base, and so I'm pleased to be in a spiritual house of God to give this talk tonight. I think addiction particularly needs to have a spiritual base, and does in a lot of the programs, even the secular programs. And I do think that if we ever have world peace, it will definitely be spiritually directed and not politically directed. There's no need to take notes. You have some in front of you on my website, www.helogmd.com. The slides are there. You can download them if you like. But also there's a narrative that goes with it that you can also download if you like, that has a lot of the notes of the things that I'll be saying tonight. Addiction is a mean illness, and it causes a great deal of grief individually, and it also causes a great deal of grief in the families and in the workplace and in society in general. Tonight we want to make it a little bit lighter and try to relax a little and learn a little bit about it if you don't know all of these things. I do have some fun books that she mentioned. They're novels. They're set in Birmingham, and they're fun reading, but they are very educational on the topics of bipolar and addiction. Let me see, where did we start out here? Understanding addiction, and I should point at this one, right? Okay. So that's my biases, okay? Goals and objectives of this talk tonight is to understand the meaning of addiction, the spectrum of addiction, the power of addiction, and to understand treatment and recovery. I don't see any people jumping up and down saying that was very exciting. So let me just say the meaning of addiction is complicated. I doubt that you know all of it, and you won't know all of it when you leave, but I hope you'll know more than you know tonight when we start. The spectrum is huge, and I don't even know all of the names of all of the addictions. The power of addiction is more enormous than you can imagine unless you're addicted. Treatment is varied and not always so good. But I want to tell you a little bit about the power of addiction, because I doubt that you understand it if you haven't been addicted. Just last weekend, I needed to go buy some office supplies. And as you know, an addict who's trying to be in recovery will not go to a bar to get a glass of water. So I figured I better go to a place that I could be safe to buy some office supplies, and I went to Staples thinking that'd probably be the safest place I could go. I got my supplies, and I got to the counter, and I looked to the side, and there was a whole shelf of all kinds of candy, Snicker bars, everything else. And there I was, tempted, right there in Staples, you know? I fought it, but I lost. I enjoyed that Snicker bar. I call that addiction light, but it is an addiction. And by the way, did you know that we're the only species that rewards ourselves with poison and our children? We give them sugar in all kinds of forms, and it's poison to us, and we use it until we die, and probably die sooner than we would if we didn't use it. Anyway, let's look at what we're going to talk about. That's to define addiction, to differentiate addiction from dependence, and that's important. Expand the scope, explain denial, conceptualize the addictive process. give a perspective of the cost of addiction, explain the difference between addiction and the comorbid illnesses or the relationship, overview of the topics, the treatment options, discuss enabling, and emphasize the permanence. Now, I'm going to rush through some of these. Our time is going to be limited. Just 20 years ago, the definition of addiction was being a slave to a habit. Didn't even mention a substance, although people were dying from heroin back then. And then they changed it just 6 years ago to a state of psychological and physical dependence on a substance, and didn't mention non-substance things such as running or the internet, things of that nature. Well, now we have a medical definition of addiction. There's 7 things here. If you develop tolerance to something, you're headed toward addiction. If you develop withdrawal when you stop using, that's considerable. If you have difficulty controlling using the substance, if you have negative consequences with work or self-esteem or job or things like that, or if you're putting off or neglecting activities that you should be doing, or spending significant time obtaining, using, concealing, planning, or recovering, that's a problem. Or if you have a desire to cut down and you're unable to. That's 7 different things that will indicate that you might have an addiction. And if you can say yes to just 3 of those, then you're classified as an addict. So who's an addict? It's a person who does 3 of those things, right? Let's say we have somebody that did that, and they went to Sanders' place out there, and they got treated, and they quit. They haven't had that habit now or that use now for 10 years, maybe 20, maybe 30, maybe even 50 years. Would you still call them an addict because they have none of the behaviors now, never crave it or anything? Well, if you don't, you're wrong, because they're still an addict. An addict is an addict until the day they die. They can only fight it day by day. At this point, I want to tell you about 3 patients. I didn't get very far telling you about the power of addiction when I was talking about my Snicker bar. So I want to tell you about a patient that I saw a few years back. I was consulted to see this patient because the patient had cirrhosis and depression. So I go up thinking I'm going to talk to her about her depression, give her some antidepressants, help her define her treatment program when she leaves, until I open the door and walk in. She's 34 years old. She's bloated. She's yellow from toe to eyeballs. It's obvious she's not going to leave the hospital. So she knew that I was coming. She'd actually asked to see a psychiatrist. Her question was, Dr. Logue, I've been drinking for many years. The last time I binged, I got yellow, but I got over it. And the doctors told me, if you binge again, your liver is so damaged, we don't think you'll make it. You'll likely die if you binge one more time. And I did all right for 2 or 3 months, and then I was with some friends. I was healthy, I looked good. My friends thought I was healthy. They thought I could handle one and just sort of celebrate. I wondered about that, but I thought I felt pretty good too, and I thought really I could just handle one. But you know the rest. You can't do just one. So I did the one, and then I did another, and then I did several, and then I binged, and here I am. And I'm dying. And I will be dead in a few days. And she was in 12 days. My children won't have a mother growing up. I won't get to see them grow up. I won't get to see grandchildren. Please tell me why. Why did I take that drink? And all I could say was, you underestimated the power of the addiction. The addiction is like the devil. You cannot hand wrestle addiction. If you're addicted to something and you put it in your hand, it is going to hand wrestle you, and you're going to lose. That was a sad case. That is the power of addiction. You have to multiply the Snicker bar by about 1,000 to see what the power of addiction is. Another case I want to tell you about was a 19-year-old that I treated years ago when we could keep people in the hospital 2 to 3 weeks. She'd gotten involved in drugs. She was sassing her parents. It's a terrible home situation. She dried out pretty easy and pretty quickly, being young and healthy. Saw the error of her ways and said she would be fine. She didn't need to have any more drugs. She agreed to follow her up as an outpatient. I saw her in a week or two. She looked good and said she was doing well. The second time she came in was 2 or 3 weeks later, and I could tell when she walked in the door she was mad. She was angry, and I asked why. What was wrong with her? Well, my best friend died this past weekend. Oh, so what happened? Well, we were at a party, and we were having fun. Of course, we were smoking a little joint, and some people had some alcohol, and some people had a little horse, and there was, of course, some cocaine there. With various ones using different things, you know. My friend probably had a little bit of most of it, but she took a little bit too much of the horse, heroin, and she passed out. We couldn't revive her, and so we called the ambulance. And the blankety-blank ambulance drivers were so slow getting there. It was pitiful they were so slow. And they carried her to the hospital, and you know those blank doctors were so blank stupid they couldn't save her. She died. It was just a little mistake she made, just a little mistake. But she's dead, and she was my best friend. The other lady that I want to tell you about was 65, and she had radiographic evidence of a bad, bad back. She was in a lot of pain. She was a very spiritual lady. So was her husband, who was a deacon. She came to me. She was depressed and suicidal. She agreed to take some antidepressants and a light artificial narcotic, Dawson, if you remember that drug, pretty mild. That was enough to get her pain from a 10 down to about a 5. The antidepressant lifted her mood. She was able to get back into functioning in society and back into the church and that sort of thing. But her husband couldn't stand it, and he said, you know, that medicine is the devil's medicine. Nobody needs to be seeing a psychiatrist. Psychiatrists are the devil's agent, and that's his medicine. I want you off of that medicine. She said, I have to have this medicine. But he enlisted the minister, not someone from Birmingham, and they convinced her that she was against God's will by taking that medicine. So she quit. So a little while later, about a week or two, she started hurting within days. She was back in her depression within 2 weeks. She realized she couldn't tolerate it, so she surreptitiously started taking her medicine again. And in 2 to 3 weeks, she was doing okay again. So they all thought that was great until her husband found her medicine. And at that time, it was even worse than before, because now she was sort of spitting in the face of the parishioners in the church. And she really got blasted then by everybody. So she had to have some relief. Her husband had some pain relievers under his mattress by the name of a 38, and she took it and put a bullet right through her head and ended her life. That's the power of pain and the power of addiction that you see in two separate people there. The one being dependent and the other being depressed. Well, addiction is being dependent on some substance or thing that it so overpowers one as to neutralize the judgment and controls to the point that one will behave in a manner obviously detrimental to themselves and others. Dependence is a person who uses a substance or behavior to alleviate some physical or psychological need while maintaining adequate judgment to protect themselves and others. you can still get dependent, you know, when you use addictive substances without getting addicted. Things I say that are in common with addiction and dependence, I think they are both twin assassins. You know, you can be addicted, you can be dependent on something. For example, methadone, which started out as a wonderful thing, but has wound up, I think, being a terrible thing, the methadone clinics. Let's say someone is taking 100 milligrams of methadone, and then they have a party or a doctor prescribe them some benzodiazepines like Valium or something like that, and they take the Valium on top of the methadone and they die. A lot of them do. And a lot of the Hollywood people died back in the 60s and 70s of that combination. Alcohol with the methadone will do it also. There are other combinations of medicines like that. So they are twin assassins, whether it's dependence or whether it's addiction. Well, dependency develops with both. You have withdrawal whether you're dependent or an addict. Either one will give you a dependency and a tolerance. You get a tolerance. That's one thing about pain medicine. Someone comes in, they've got real pain, you give them some medicine, and in a few weeks it's not working because they've developed tolerance and they have to increase it, so you increase it. If you keep increasing it, you get to the point where you're not relieving the pain, but you're over-medicating the person and they can die from the overdose. So you're just as well off not to start it in the first place and just use Tylenol or ibuprofen most of the time. Craving, that happens in both addiction and in dependence. There's some things not in common. You are a slave to the behavior or to the substance in addiction. You're powerless over the addictive substance. Your judgment is warped by the desire and the need for the substance. Your thought process is commandeered. Your mind protects the substance and denies personal responsibility. You blame others. You make illogical choices. You're willing to harm yourself and others to satisfy your craving. That would be like selling one's body or stealing from family and friends and neighbors as well. All right, so what are some of the types of addiction? We all know that the big three are drugs, alcohol, and smoking, right? But then there's gambling, and then there's food. Yes, food is an addiction. Internet, video games, sex, pornography, work, running, racing, shopping, shoes. I've heard that before. I've heard people groan just like that in when I say shoes. But, you know, when I got interested in shoes being an addiction, first when Imelda Marcos had thousands of pairs. But then my wife and I went to a Saturday morning breakfast one day, and we were waiting for the waitress to take our order, and the waitress comes up, "Oh, hey, honey, I love those shoes. Where do you get those shoes?" And I'm sitting there like, what in the world is going on, you know? And so my wife engages her real quickly about where she got the shoes and so forth, you know. I'm sort of hanging out on the distance out here. And the lady said, "Oh, I'll get mine online, honey. You can get them there so much cheaper and better, you know." I said, "I got hundreds of pairs of shoes. I just can't turn them down. I love my shoes." My boyfriends, though, they don't like them at all. I thought I had me a good boyfriend, and you know, I saw him several times, and he came to the apartment, and he opened my closet door, and he saw my shoes, and he turned around and said, "I'm out of here." And he was gone, and I haven't seen him since. Oh. So I looked it up, and you know, there has been a book written on addiction to shoes. There's really a book out there on that. Well, you get addicted to nose spray too. Also to coffee. A lot of us are addicted to coffee. Power is a big one. People are addicted to power. We see that in the corporate world a lot. Clothes, that's another big one. What about gossip? Oh yeah, gossip is a big one. Relationship addictions. And one of the biggest ones is approval. You know, we look to everybody for approval. At first it's our parents, and then it's our friends, and then it's our boss. Finally we wake up and realize we only need one approval, and that's God's approval. You know, it takes a while for people to catch on. But fortunately, some people do catch on in time. There's the big three. Tell you a little bit about denial. Just 6 years ago, denial was said to be an emotional conflict reduced in the unconscious to resolve the addiction problem, you know, the guilt and so forth. Well, that's baloney. It doesn't resolve it, it just hides it. It hides it down in the subconscious and in the unconscious. So that's basically what denial is. So we'll move on that one. Let's conceptualize the addictive process. You or your children may run across something fun, somebody that's offering them or you a joint or a snort or a beer or whatever it might be, and you might think, well, that seems harmless enough and it's sort of cute. I think I'll maybe involve myself a little bit here and have a little fun. And so you take up this new friend and you start having a little bit of fun, and you have some camaraderie, you have a mind-altering effect. It may be calming or it may be stimulation. It's a change from the status quo, and that's what they're looking for, because they're not really all that happy. So they're tempted and they're vulnerable. Then the use becomes more frequent, and finally you realize that you actually want this substance and you're using it more, and then you take a closer look at your little friend and you find out, oh my goodness, he had a hook and now it's in my skin and I've been hooked. So the monster's true nature is there with his hook. And you see, you're using denial, you're blaming others, you're resisting treatment. It costs you in dollars, it costs you in health, relationships, jobs, and you're going to hit bottom. Then you die. Or maybe you wake up to recovery. Maybe, you know, if you're lucky. Well, what about the cost of addiction just here in Alabama? Drugs and alcohol. You got over 400 million with prisons and courts and that sort of thing, over 300 million in schools, over 300 million in health care, and then your regulations over 200 million, and then the other things another million. All adds up to $1.4 billion. Now that was several years ago. It's much more than that today. What does that mean to us as an individual? Am I going the wrong way? Yeah. Okay. For each person, it's $350 annually. Well, that's about $1,000 per family, right? But you know, many are too young to work, many are retired, many are disabled, some can't find work, and some are lazy. And so what does it mean to the tax-paying people? So each tax-paying household spends about $2,000 to $2,500 in their taxes to the state of Alabama every year just to support drug and alcohol problems. A lot of shoes, huh? Smoking is another $1.5 billion. So now we're up to about $5,000 per tax-paying household. So it's not all coming from the household, some of it's from the business and so forth. But if you look at it on a household basis, that's about what it would be. There's a thing called comorbid illnesses, the ones that go hand in hand with addiction. Borderline personality is one, bipolar is one, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, and general anxiety disorder. Most people get confused when they hear schizoaffective, thinking that's just another form of schizophrenia. It's not. Affective disorder is mood disorder. Schizophrenia is a psychotic disorder, thought disorder. Schizoaffective means that sometimes your mood gets so out of whack that it looks like schizophrenia, and they call it schizoaffective. So that's what schizoaffective is. The street drugs make it harder to treat those illnesses. And guess what? Those illnesses make it harder to treat addiction. So if you have one and you add the other, you've just got double trouble, and you're going to be in trouble because nobody is going to be able to sit down and talk you through it and get you out of it real easy. Well, there are a few treatment options. Alcoholics Anonymous, Narc Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous. Oh, and going along with Gamblers Anonymous nowadays, the scams that are going along, these sweepstakes that you get from Nigeria and wherever. I have had 2 people now that I've treated that had spent over $100,000 of their family money before they caught on what was happening. And one of them had to go off for treatment and is doing well. It frequently happens in the very early stage of dementia when people start losing their judgment. They fall for things, but not always. I actually had a very bright, high-ranking bank executive attorney that got caught in that scam. And he, because of his position, thought he could get the FBI involved and catch him. Never caught him. They say you never will. Those are the people that don't need to be on this earth. They are so bad. They prey on these people terrible. But Alcoholics Anonymous is good. It's probably one of the better programs of the Anonymous programs. And they have some good successes. They also have a great support system, and that is very important. The 12-step programs are good. AA will tell you to attend 90 meetings in 90 days and work the 12-step programs. I tell people work the 12-step programs in 12 months. And you might not know it, but that is a huge challenge. And many people can't do it. Some people never get through the 12 steps. But those 12 steps are really good steps if people work them. They get to know themselves much better. Wilderness programs, pretty good for someone who's, say, 13 to 17. After that, they're not all that good, but they're still better than a 30-day program. 30-day programs are terrible. 12 months, much better than anything else if you can get a 12-month program. There are 2 types, the secular programs and the spiritual programs. I wish there was a spiritual secular program where they're both coordinated and they both work together, because they're both needed to have a full recovery. Unless you get a miracle, of course. You know, sometimes you do get that, you know. The outpatient programs are not real good. It's really difficult for someone who's a hard addict to really get through it and stay in recovery just with an outpatient program. What about dual diagnosis programs? That's a good start, particularly if somebody has bipolar or borderline personality, where they can get the psychiatric and the addiction stuff started, but then they need to go on further and have treatment for both disorders, one from the mental health system and one from the substance abuse system. Residential facilities, they're good, and we have some successes there. Inpatient psychiatry units, good for mental health issues, but not so much for addiction. What about commitment? Just send them down there and lock them up till they're well. The law will not allow a commitment of a person who's addicted, even if that person is going to have another drink and die. The law says that's the person's choice. If the person's depressed, you can persuade the judge that I need to get him there to treat his depression. Then we'll worry about the addiction, and the judge will say okay to that. So sometimes we get them in and get them started. Well, what about intervention? Some people say that's worthless. I say bunk. Intervention can be very, very helpful. What is more powerful than your entire family, a group of your friends, and a specialist in intervention locking you in the room and not letting you go until you agree for treatment. That's powerful. They show love, they show compassion, they want the person to be alive, they want the person to get over their addiction. And if they go, many of them actually get involved in the treatment and do recover. So never underestimate the power of intervention. Well, what about the pharmacological treatments? Antabuse was the first one. If you take antabuse and you drink alcohol, you're going to feel like you're going to die. Even just a cough medicine. If you take a teaspoon of cough medicine and you're taking antabuse, you're going to be sick, real sick. I was introduced to antabuse, let me see what year that was, 1964, my first year in family practice. I had a call from a family, please come, their teenage daughter was hysterical. So I made a house call. We did that in those days. Y'all know what a house call is? Oh, she was hysterical. Her father worked at the bomb plant in South Carolina. And he and his buddies were driving home and they stopped and had a beer. He was embarrassed not to have one. He was drinking the beer and he was taking antabuse and he died on the way home just from that antabuse. That was my first introduction to antabuse. As you might guess, I don't prescribe antabuse. You know, I think it's dangerous. Methadone started out good because it had a good incentive, I guess, get people off the street, get them off of the heroin and that sort of thing. But it has now become a mill. People have to pay $10 to $15 to $20 per pill for methadone. It's cheap as dirt in the pharmacy if the doctor prescribed it in the pharmacy, but the doctor would go to jail. You could only get it in the methadone clinic for substance abuse. The doctor can prescribe it for pain, but he better make sure his records indicate there's a reason for treating the pain, you know. Shontex, it's good to stop the craving or the pleasure from a cigarette. When you smoke a cigarette, the smoke goes into your trachea, your lungs, into your heart, into your brain within 2 seconds. And nicotine is a very powerful brain stimulant. So it's like your brain lights up, just like it would with heroin or cocaine. But it wears off in about 4 hours, so you have to have another one. When a person's really addicted to cigarettes, they're going to smoke a pack or more a day. So it's not easy to quit. Campril. Oh, with Shontex, the problem with it cutting off the pleasure center for cigarettes, it cuts off the pleasure for other things too. So imagine if you already had a little bit of depression and you cut off all pleasure. That's why some of the people on Shontex suicide. Yeah, they do. They suicide. Suboxone is a fancy substitute for methadone, maybe even more addictive than methadone. Campril is a pill, 333 milligrams, and if you take it 3 times a day, it sort of kills the desire for alcohol. I can't imagine doing that myself, but I do have one patient that does that and says it works. I developed an anagram for people that want to know about addiction in themselves. Admit you have addiction. Declare freedom from addiction. Declare commitment to a healthy body, soul, work, and relationship. Imagine yourself in a healthy lifestyle without addictive substances. Commit to continual self-education about addiction. You'll never learn it all, so you want to continue to learn every day of your life. Teach others all you can about addiction. Involve a buddy, very important. Own up to personal relationships and shortcomings. If you don't ever get to that point, you'll never overcome it. Never, ever let your guard down. It will bounce back on you. And now I am going to skip these next ones. They're expanded. Each one of those things I've expanded a little bit, and so you can read them at your leisure. We'll move on to treatment. Well, what about treatment? Treatment is just working recovery. How do you work recovery? You don't use today. And then tomorrow, when you get up, you look in the mirror and you look in your eyes and you say, I made it yesterday, I'm going to make it today, no matter what, and this is the way I'm going to do it. I'm not going to give in to anybody or anything. I will make it through this day. And only until you've steeled yourself and you know that you can walk out into the street and make it, do you open your front door and leave. That's the only way to work recovery. And you have to tell yourself, remember, if I lose recovery, I lose everything. Why do you lose everything? Because you're right back at ground zero and you've lost trust again. It's hard to get your trust back once you let people know you're an addict. So you really have to do that. But then what happens? You walk out into the street and you have a society of enablers. All of them are attacking you, wanting you to go back to using. Pushers, they know you, they know your name, they know your weaknesses, they know your habits, and they will push you. Your family will say, you're so mean when you're not smoking or not having a beer. You know, you're irritable. Let me go get you a beer. Let me go get you a pack of cigarettes. So many spouses keep a pack of cigarettes hidden, you know, so that when their spouse runs out, they don't have to get up in the middle of the night and go to a 7-Eleven. Oh, I've got a pack hidden for you here. They clean their ashtrays, you know. They do every little thing to enable them. So, shouldn't do that. Friends, you know, friends will also help. Everybody wants you to feel good. They don't want to make you feel bad. They're not going to make you, talk about you real bad or anything. Employers. Like one of the employers in my book is a good example of that. He had the best employee, treated him like a son and so forth. It almost cost him his business, you know. Anyway, doctors, we want to help people. So if they come in and they say they've got a sprained ankle, we might just want to give them a little Lortab. We don't bother to ask, have you ever been addicted to narcotics? Or do you have addictive personality? Have you been addicted to anything? We just give them a prescription. Some doctors go to jail for things like that now. I treat one doctor that lost his whole practice and everything. And he was one of the doctors that gave away more free treatment than any doctor I've ever known. But he got set up and he got busted and he lost everything. Therapists want to help too. And a lot of therapists don't even know the difference between addiction and dependence. But anyway, they want to help. Ministers want to help. We all want to help. But to help, we need to know as much as we can know. I want to show you something here. That's an infinity circle in an infinity circle. Infinity circle is when you get in, you can't get out of, right? Let's say the one in the center is addiction. You're sort of going in loops around and around and around. You can't get out of it. And the big one around it, let's say that's allergy. And why do I have those superimposed that way? Because there's so much alike, a physiological component that you might not believe it. But it's hard to get away from either one of them. The analogy is simply this. Let's say we have twins who were born in 1930. And so at about 1950, they're about 20 years old. One of them has a fractured leg and gets put on morphine. That's what we had back then. And the person liked it and they got addicted to it. The other one on the head had pneumonia and got a shot of penicillin and had a bad reaction. The doctor that gave the penicillin told the twin, don't ever take penicillin. You could have an anaphylactic reaction and die. The one with the morphine didn't get any such advice. She went on her way, but she found ways to get morphine. And finally, she got in recovery, and she got off of it, and she was in recovery for many, many years. And now they're about 83 or 88? What is it? 83 years old, and one of them goes in to the doctor and says, "You got pneumonia, let me give you a shot of penicillin." "Oh no, I can't take that, it'll kill me, because they know an allergy is there permanently, is there for life, and it would kill the person. On the other hand, the other one goes in and her other ankle is sprained now, and the doctor says, I'll give you a prescription for Lortab. Oh yeah, that would be nice. Thinking, after all these years, what's the big deal, She takes the Lortab, she runs out about a week later, she starts looking for some Lortab, and she will find it on the streets or wherever she can find it, because the addiction is right back just as strong as that allergy is back. Now, how does that happen? It happens sort of like this. When you start using an addictive substance, your DNA is sitting there. Of course, it's all snarled like this, but for these purposes, let's suppose it's solid like this, and the addictive substance is Valium, okay? And you just keep giving it day after day, and you actually bend the DNA, and you get it bent down about like that. And then somebody gets you in recovery, and you really want to do recovery, so you work it real hard. Well, after a year of not using any, it goes back about 50%. So we got one more year, right? Nope. One more year, it's 50% of that. And the next year, it's 50% of that. It never gets to zero. It's always still there. After 5 years, you're down about 3% of the cravings and so forth. Most people can make it after 5 years, But those first 2 or 3 years is pretty rough, pretty rough. But that's how it works, and that's addiction and allergy, you see. But allergy, I'm not sure it goes away like that, but the cravings do go away. Now, I think we need to have a war on addiction, okay? Oh, did I not give you my vignette? Okay. All right, let me give you my vignette. Have I got time? It's already 7 o'clock. Can I have a few more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. I started smoking a little bit right after high school, and smoked a little bit here and there. Couldn't afford much anyway. But before long, I realized I was smoking fairly regular, and I did for a number of years. After I got in medical school, I decided to try to quit. And I quit for 9 months, and I thought I really had it made. And I was with friends like the young lady I told you about, and had a cigarette, and I had to buy a pack before the night was over. Years later, I quit again for 12 months, and I thought, surely by now it's out of my system. And lo and behold, I smoked one, and I smoked again for a few more years. We didn't know back then what we know now about addiction, but I finally quit on March the 15th, 1972, for the third time, and I knew then I couldn't have one. That was when I was moving to Birmingham, and I wanted people to look at me as a psychiatrist, not as an addict. And that was my motive to quit, and I quit. And I've never smoked one since, except, of course, in my dreams. After I had been quit a year, I smoked one, I promise you, was that long. One of the best cigarettes I ever smoked in my life. But I woke up scared to death, thinking I had actually started back. So I thought, well, maybe I've got it out of my system now. In 1984, 12 years after I quit smoking, I had a bout with Epstein-Barr, sort of like mono, and I was sick for a while. I dreamed at night I was smoking. Your subconscious is brilliant. It knows exactly when to hit you hard. I can help you. I can make you feel better. I can stimulate you. You'll feel better. Nobody will know. I won't tell. And you just do it now while you're sick and then put them aside, Well, I had to wrestle with that, and get through that illness. And finally, I quit dreaming it because the subconscious finally realized I was not going to start back smoking. I was working recovery. You know what? I'm still working recovery. And how many years has that been? 41 years. I'm working recovery now. 41 years. So that's addiction. You may still have a question on power. I want to tell you one more story. Another person I saw while I was covering for another doctor in the hospital. 21, 22-year-old kid that had been admitted for an overdose of heroin. And he was just sort of getting back to feeling all right, and I was talking to him, and he said it just was something he really liked to do. And I said, well, I bet at your age you've had some friends that have died, right? He said, oh, yeah. In fact, that's why I'm here. I took an overdose after my friend died from an overdose. You did that? Yeah. Why? No, it doesn't matter, you know. Just life doesn't really matter if you really want to have some fun with your heroin. So I said, well, how many friends have died that you know? He said, well, up to now, 21. Here in Birmingham, you know, 21 of his friends. He actually said friends and drug acquaintances. You know, they weren't every one of those friends. I confirmed that when I talked with his father. He really did know that many people that had died. And while he was still in the hospital, another one of his friends died. His father told me they just wait for the phone call, you know, to know that their son is dead, you know. It is a powerful thing, addiction, folks. You just cannot imagine how powerful it is. There was one other guy there that came in fairly regular, and one of the nurses asked him one day, how do you afford this? You know, I mean, it's expensive to use as much heroin as you use. He said, well, I'm what's called a crackhead dummy. I said, well, what do you mean by crackhead dummy? Well, you know the dummies in the crash vehicles and so forth? Well, when the pushers get new heroin, they don't really know the strength of it and so forth. So they test it on somebody, and they supply me to be a tester, you know? And that's how I get mine. It wasn't but a few weeks when he was dead, you know? And that month in Birmingham, 40 people died of a heroin overdose just in that 1 month. It's not in the papers. You don't read about how much it's out there. But it is so powerful. It is unreal. Now, the war on addiction, let's see here, it's within ourselves. We have a big war to overcome addiction. So the best way is never to start, right? Within our families, we talked about that a little bit. Within society, we talked about that a little bit. You know, the government can spend every bit of our money on people that are already addicts, and we'll never win this battle. If we're ever going to win it, it's going to be in the first few years of their life, you know, when somebody has to teach them you'd never, ever tempt addiction. Never. And if you can indoctrinate them in those first 15 years well enough, you will prevent almost all addiction in 2 decades. That's where we need to be having our war on addiction. All right, just for a summary now. Addicts are powerless to prevent a habit or use of substance, knowing the dire consequences. Unless we're heavily indoctrinated not to begin addictive behavior, we can easily be seduced into trying it. We can become hooked instantly, such as with cocaine or heroin, or insidiously, such as with cigarettes. There are various treatment options. None of them are as good as yourself. You have to be the one that does the treatment because you have to work the recovery. There is no cure ever. It's only a day-to-day recovery program. Addiction is permanent, is permanent, is permanent. Don't ever forget that. Don't ever let your guard down.